Let's say Tzom Gedaliah share a brief idea. This morning when we were saying Slichos, one would have expected, being that we're commemorating Tzom Gedaliah, the death of Gedaliah, who was appointed the governor of the small remnant of Jews that Nebuchadnezzar allowed and encouraged to stay in the land, to tend to the land. And he was killed at the hands of a competitor, someone who thought he was worthier than him, and did away and assassinated Gedaliah ben Achikam, that we'd find a Slicha that would talk about the details of that episode. But the truth is, there's only one passing reference to the Tzom of Gedaliah ben Achikam, without any details about the event that took place, but rather bemoans the state of the Jews after that episode and how the remnant of the Jewish people, the small ember that remained, was driven from the land. And the question is why that is that the emphasis? Isn't the emphasis on the terrible tragedy and the circumstances and the hatred that led and the jealousy, part of what we work on in that Seshmei Tshuva to improve ourselves? Evidently, that is not the main message. The Rambam, when he brings in his Hilchos Tanios different fast days, and he refers to Tzom Gedaliah, he certainly makes reference to his being killed at the hands of Yishmael ben Asanya. But the Rambam then goes on and says, the day is a day of tragedy because that was when the Gachalas Yisrael, the coal, the remaining coal, was totally extinguished, and the Golus was a fait accompli, and those who were left were driven out and eventually killed. And obviously, what it seems is as follows. I saw this thought in the name of Rabbi Sternfeld, who was a great guy pre-war in Europe, in the town of Bilsk, wrote several svarim. And he says, evidently, what it's telling us is that the tragedy is like the tragedies of all the other days that we face. It's the tragedy of losing the Beis Hamikdash and then eventually losing the land and all the Kedusha. But what we do commemorate is the acknowledgement that if not for the death of Gedaliah ben Achikam, the merit of the tzaddik would have kept us in the land, and perhaps we would have remained, as the Navi Yirmiyahu prophesied, to Yochanan Mekereach, who was the one who avenged Gedaliah's death, killing Yishmael, but then not listening to the Navi and going to Mitzrayim and leading the Jews there, who met their fate many years later, being killed by Nebuchadnezzar. The message is that we have tzaddikim, and when we no longer have the tzaddikim who protect us, so then we are exposed to our own failings and the need to go into Golus. I thought that is why perhaps the Slicha emphasizes that, like the Rambam says, that's the what we really emphasize, our being bereft, our being empty-handed without the tzaddikim that we have. It's not as much the circumstances of why he died, but the fact that once a tzaddik leaves, and that's what it means when we say Gadol Misas Tzaddikim, K'srevis Beis Elokeinu, that when the tzaddik goes, just like the Beis Hamikdash goes, we are the ones who lose out without someone to give us Kedusha and inspiration and the schusim we need to remain alive. And I was just thinking, look back at the previous year, so many great Gedalim died. Of course, Reb Chaim Kanevsky, Reb Shalom Cohen, the leader of Sephardic Jewry, Tuvia Weiss, the leader of the Eda Charedis, and many, many other great personalities, tzaddikim, people who did chesed, some great philanthropists, some great people of doing chesed, Yanki Mayer, who initiated the Misaskim organization, and the young Rosh Hashiva in Chicago Tells, who just barely took over from his father on the rise, and his ember was extinguished. And perhaps in these Seshmei Tshuva, it's a time to think about what we have lost and what we have to fill the void and rise up to the challenge. We had the people we can rely on, but now we have to rely on ourselves. And of course, the secondary message is that, just like in the story of Gedaliah, the tragic episode of Yishmael not accepting the authority of the premier sage, Gedaliah ben Achikam, and Yochanan ben Kireach, who didn't adhere to the words of the Navi Yirmiyah, who told him and promised if you stay, it will be well. Maybe it's another lesson for us. To accept authority even when it's sometimes difficult. And the Gedaliah Torah, the Gedalim that we do have, and the people who represent them, as the Talmud of the Ramchal, Rabbi David Valley, says the word gacheles, that the Rambam uses, gacheles Yisrael, the ember, the coal, still flickering, but was extinguished. Gacheles equals emes. On the emes, Torah is emes, and the Gedalim are emes, who stand for emes. May we all rise on this third day of Aseret Shemei Tshuva, and strive for the emes in our own lives, and look towards those who inspire us with the words of emes, the great Torah that they represent, and may we be inspired, these Aseret Shemei Tshuva, to fill the vacuum.